I offer these every week along with a guided meditation. Just click the subscribe link below to be notified through YouTube when I post the latest recording. Or if you'd like to join us live, which would be great, just go into the description section below and follow the link along to be able to sign up for free. I would like to talk with you about a way of practicing when things are difficult. And I'm going to share some Buddhist teachings with you, some poetry, even some lines from Leonard Cohen will start us off, and my own recent reflections about the good news that's actually also true. Alongside whatever is problematic, the good news that is also true. I have a personal little saying in 3 parts: deal with the bad, turn to the good, take in the good. That seems to summarize a lot of practice, doesn't it? Deal with the bad, outside and inside. We're not denying it. We're not bypassing it. And also, turn to the good that is also true, in part to help you deal with the bad and for its own sake. And as you experience what is beneficial, that's what I mean by good, what is useful or enjoyable, and often both, as you do that, let it land inside so that it gradually gets hardwired into your body and nervous system to overcome and to compensate for the brain's evolved negativity bias. Deal with the bad, turn to the good that's also true, and then take in the good that results. That sums up a lot of stuff. So in that context then, I'd like to start with a quotation from that great Zen practitioner, who also happened to be a world-class, musician and poet, Leonard Cohen. Bless his memory. So I'll read it. People pay me not to sing, so I'll spare you that effort. Leonard, he writes, "I know your burden's heavy as you wheel it through the night. The guru says it's empty. That doesn't make it light." I mean, he's so clever. And the truth is, everyone carries burdens. Some people carry really, really heavy burdens. I'm not here for a competition around burdens and grievances. It just is a way of saying that we're here. We are burdened. All kinds of things. I need to have a tooth pulled. It's cracked. What? I'm deeply concerned about some people I know and love. The world is heating up. It's just a fact. We're burdened by various things. There's no way around that. What do we do about it? That's what the Buddha and all kinds of other teachers, including teachers today through all kinds of traditions, including certainly the native indigenous traditions around the world, who grapple with these issues. Artists, playwrights, poets, teachers, movie makers. What do we do? How do we deal with what Leonard Cohen is saying here? That each of us has a burden that's heavy. This is where in Buddhism we have the fundamental teaching of equanimity. And equanimity is a fancy word. It actually has a fundamental and simple meaning. So I'll read this here from a teacher of mine who I respect a lot, Gil Fronsdal. Gil writes, "Equanimity is the ground for wisdom and freedom, and the protector of compassion and love. While some may think of equanimity as dry neutrality or cool aloofness, mature equanimity produces radiance and warmth of being." To be really clear, relaxation, let's say, tranquility, is having no reactions. Right? There's a stillness there. Equanimity is more profound because equanimity means we can be having reactions. We can be outraged and disgusted morally at this or that and fired up to do something about it, or shocked with sorrow, or grappling with deep remorse, or ecstatic with joy Equanimity is an undisturbed spaciousness inside ourselves as the field or ground in which those experiences are occurring. Equanimity is not reacting to our reactions. It's a very mature quality that we develop over time. We're balanced with equanimity. We still see what we see, and we still have our values related to it, and we make plans about it, but we can do all that in a field without any craving, or with very little craving, very little of that drivenness and reactivity and contraction and pressure and self-preoccupation that the Buddha identified a long time ago as the primary engine of our suffering, the needless pain and sorrow that we create for ourselves and often for those around us. Equanimity is like a shock absorber. Life lands, and we like some of it, we don't like other parts of it, but then instead of the typical mechanical clockwork dominoes falling sequence in which we react to pain and pleasure, right, loss and gain, instead of reacting to it, we feel it, we have space for it, but we're not penetrated by it in the core of our being. So how in the world can we develop this over time? One example of this kind of equanimity, and I want to give you the quotation here that I find really lovely. It's on the wall of my office. And so imagine this quotation as alongside a picture from behind in a Japanese Zen kind of environment in the wintertime with snow on the ground in one of these rock gardens. Very peaceful, very quiet. And so you see from the back this large sort of robed figure with a shaved head. And next to this large robed figure is a little child, both of them in black robes looking out over this very peaceful garden. And the quotation from the Dhammapada is, "How very happily we live, free from busyness, among those who are busy. Among busy people, free from busyness, we dwell." So with equanimity, and I'll be getting into some ways to grow it. It's a work in progress for me, but I have some sense of how to progress with this. We could also say, and you could change some of the words, right? How very happily we live, free from freaking out among people who are freaking out. Among people who are freaking out, free from freaking out, we dwell. Or how very happily we live, free from vengeful fantasies. Among those who are vengeful. Among vengeful people, free from vengefulness, we dwell. And you could add other words to this if you like. How very happily we live, free from helpless outrage. Among those who are helplessly outraged. Among those who are helplessly outraged, free from helpless outrage, we dwell. Now, how to do this authentically? Authentically, for real, from the inside out. So there's some guidance here, and I'm going to use this guidance to slide into sort of the heart of my presentation here. Here also is a teaching from the Dhammapada, and it's very central to how are you practicing with that, which is what I talked about just before we began formally. And it's very central to clinical psychology and coaching, and central to wisdom traditions around the world. As the Dhammapada puts it, wonderful it is to train the mind, so swiftly moving, seizing whatever it wants. Good it is to have a well-trained mind, for a well-trained mind brings happiness. Now, this might sound initially like a big burden. I got to train my mind. I don't want to train my mind. Too much work. Well, I think what we're talking about here is really at the scale of a few minutes a day for most of us. And the opportunity here is that we can gradually develop a mind, as the Buddha put it, which is malleable. In other words, it's increasingly shapeable and wieldy. We can use our mind to good purpose. That's incredibly hopeful. We're not just stuck. We're not robots who can't grow and change. One of the breakthroughs for me when I was a really miserable teenager was realizing that, wow, even though my past sucked and my present was not any better, every day I could learn a little about myself, other people, how to be more skillful. I could learn a little, heal a little, and grow a little every day. And wow, that changed everything. So that's the opportunity here. So much of the Buddha Dharma is basically a very direct statement about what ails us and why it ails us. And then the bulk of the Buddhist lineages, now over 2,500 years, is about how to train the mind, basically, so that increasingly we can, among other qualities, develop the equanimity that gives us emotional balance, a kind of shock absorber in which we are seeing what we see and feeling what we feel, but it doesn't hijack us. It doesn't make us gripped with ruminating and resentment. And in all that, I want to tell two stories that set a kind of a standard and an aspiration as both the path and the fruit of the path. In other words, we can cultivate qualities in us that we're developing over time, and the cultivation of them moves us toward them. So here's the first story. I believe it's basically true. I may be wrong in a couple of the details. I'm relaying, essentially what I heard from people that I trust. And it involves Nelson Mandela and the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. And one way to get a little bit of this history in a fun way is to watch a movie with Morgan Freeman, and it'll come to me in a minute. It's involving rugby, rugby set in South Africa. Darn, someone can put the title of the the film in the chat for me here. Really a good film. I really liked it a lot, and there's a lot of history in it. So Nelson Mandela. So you have to put it in context. I grew. I was an adult during, apartheid and the collapse of apartheid in South Africa. Essentially, roughly a sixth of the population of South Africa, the descendants of the white settlers, dominated, and not all of them did it, but there was a system in which 1/6 of the population was highly advantaged and privileged and so forth, and 5/6 of the population was terribly mistreated. And that was apartheid, living apart. And so Nelson Mandela and many others, including Steve Biko and his life partner, Mandela Rampelli, who's currently the chair of the board of the Global Compassion Coalition, which I founded with colleagues and friends a couple years ago. Steve Biko was murdered by the South African police while their second child was developing inside of Mandela at the time. A really brutal, harsh, terrible situation. Mandela was imprisoned on Rikers Island for something like 27 or 29 years, a long, long time. And as I've heard, his greatest sorrow in a way, one of his great sorrows, imprisoned in Rikers Island at hard labor, breaking boulders into stones and breaking those stones into pebbles, hard labor. As he was doing that, a big sorrow for him was that he was separated from those he loved. He was unable to find people to love. Right there, isn't that incredibly touching? That the great sorrow, the great suffering, being unable to love, to find those to give love to. So he decided to love his jailers, his captors. He did not renounce what he saw and his values and his plan. He did not renounce the right to use violence, to throw off oppressors who were using violence themselves, whatever we may think of that. And he just loved his captors. And apparently, he was so loving that it became increasingly impossible for various jailers to mistreat him. So they would pull out that crew and they'd put a fresh crew in that he would continue to love. And eventually, as apartheid fell and Mandela was released and became the first Black, the first African president of this African country in its history, sitting in the front row at his inauguration as part of his security detail were some of his former guards from his prison. So think of that certainly we could think of that as a standard and aspiration that we can, look at and go, wow, that's maybe that's kind of out of reach for me right now, but I can see it and I can move toward it step by step, or you might even feel within reach. So we can see that as an expression of equanimity in a way. And we can see that him working the muscle of the heart, the figurative, metaphorical muscle of the heart, who knows what literal muscle activity with polyvagal theory he was working too, because he was working that muscle that promoted his equanimity. And I have found that myself many, many times, that when I have a grievance with someone, I cannot come to inner peace about it until I take responsibility for whatever my part was, which sometimes I consider to be zero, but I'm willing to see that it's more than zero, take responsibility for my part, and second, have compassion for them. Now, I may choose to keep my distance and disengage, and I may sometimes choose to pursue justice in various ways, but I don't get free myself until I get in touch with my heart in relationship to those who have mistreated me or those I care about. And I think that teaching is present in Mandela's story as well. Second story, the way I heard it is this: as you probably know, the Chinese government, and I distinguish the government from the people, invaded Tibet some years ago, and the Dalai Lama fled ahead of the invasion. And since then, just factually, there's been many, many terrible things have happened there in Tibet at the hands of the Chinese government. And again, the Chinese government is not its people. And still, it's an historical fact that all kinds of monasteries have been destroyed, all kinds of people have been uprooted, and potentially 1 million Tibetans, one way or another, have been killed. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. And so the Dalai Lama, in exile, in, I believe, Nepal, was visited by an older lama, an older Tibetan teacher who had been kept in prison for decades, terribly treated. I'll spare you some of the details. You can imagine the worst, and the worst is how he was treated. And so he came to the Dalai Lama and they met, and the Dalai Lama asked him to tell him about some of his experiences, what had happened. As I kind of said early on before we began formally, what was it like to be you then? And after this, Tibetan Lama had described some of what had been done to him, the Dalai Lama burst out along the lines of, wow, didn't you fear for your life? Right? And the person replied to the Dalai Lama, the only time I ever feared for my life was when it felt like I was losing my compassion for my captors. Because that was, for that individual, their true life, the life of the heart, the life of the soul, the life of the spirit, the life of that innermost, most precious temple at the center of our being. And that person refused to let, understandable, we could understand it, but they refused to let hatred invade their heart and quench the light of the true life that they identified with. That's quite a standard, isn't it? Wow, right? Quite a standard, isn't it? And still holding on to that aspiration as a central principle, as a pillar of practice. I will see clearly, and I will not let myself be poisoned by hatred. That, too, is a factor of equanimity. There's a lovely poem from Miller Williams, father, of course, of Lucinda Williams, one of my favorites. I've shared this poem previously. I'll read it. Have compassion for everyone you meet, even if they don't want it. What seems conceit, bad manners, or cynicism is always a sign of things no ears have heard, no eyes have seen. You do not know what wars are going on down there where the spirit meets the bone. So we have compassion, perhaps, as a moral, injunction, right? But mainly, certainly in a Buddhist frame, we have compassion because it's in our own self-interest to have compassion. Having this kind of compassion helps to feed us and fuel us as it flows through us and helps us maintain and grow more of that equanimity, which serves us really well. Okay. So, how do we do it? How do we do it? How do we do it? And here, I want to do something I've never done, I think, in this sitting group, and share my screen. And I want to share it related to my headline topic, which is recognizing the good news that is also true. And I want to put this in perspective because it's easy to not really get the proper context here. The essence of Buddhist practice is seeing clearly. The Pali word for that is vipassana, to have insight in what is actually true, particularly at its core, in its depths, to see clearly. It is said that the root of our problems is ignorance or delusion. So it's really important to recognize what is true. Now, that seeing clearly sometimes gets critiqued as, oh, it's just intellectual, that's just conceptual. You're not dealing with gut feelings. And I just puzzled by that because for me, it's about just recognizing what's true. I mean, how conceptual is it if you sort of look around your space, or if you're vision impaired, understandable, you might hear what's happening or know what's the case around you, and you just recognize what's true. What's true? Like knock yourself on the head. Did that happen? Is that true? We're just discerning what's true. So I want to share with you my view about what's true. And I'm going to slow down for a couple parts of this. So here we go. I want to put this in context. So you can relate to this, dare I say it, as you look out into the world, culturally, economically, environmentally, militarily, and politically. You can also use this triangle when you regard an issue in your own life. Maybe you're grappling with a health issue. Maybe you're dealing with a conflict with another person. Maybe your partner is kind of starting to drive you crazy. Not crazy. I don't want to use that word. Maybe they're just getting on your nerves. Your foot is killing you, something, right? You're dealing with stuff. So what's actually true? Well, first off, there are the actual harms. Whatever is true, without minimizing them whatsoever. For example, it's just simply a fact that human activity pours net about 55 billion tons a year of greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide and equivalents, into the sky, 55 billion. If you think about a country's contribution to greenhouse gases each year, America, with about 330 million people, the average carbon footprint average of each American, including very little babies, is about 20 tons a year. We're part of that process. We can do little things to reduce our footprint, which are worth doing. If you want, you can donate to a good nonprofit about 50 cents a day, which will pull out of the sky the carbon you cannot help but introduce to the sky. That's a detail. The point is, harms occur, real harms. And, you can be happy about the results of the recent elections in America. You could be unhappy about them, and you might consider that some harms are coming. Whatever the harms are, they are the harms. Okay, now, here we have the second level. And because I'm a dork, I want you can also think about this triangle according to a logarithmic scale, so that each level is 10 times larger than the one just above it. By the way, that's how the decibel scale of sound is done, and also the Richter scale of earthquakes. It's on a logarithmic basis. But we can't represent that in a pretty picture that Stephanie Valen made here. So then we have toxic spectacle, which toxifies the culture. That's correct, but it doesn't produce actual harms currently. So much of what we see today out in the political world is toxic spectacle, in which various forces are trying to capture our attention with spectacle of one kind or another. It's really important to appreciate that it's spectacle. It's outrageous, whatever it might be. Maybe you have, in a relationship, you have, let's say, an ex who's kind of a nightmare, and they're saying and doing all these things, but it doesn't actually harm you or your kids directly. It's just carnival, just spectacle. That's the second layer. And then the third layer, which to me at a minimum is 100 times larger, if not more, than the very top layer of actual harms, of people making a better world. And I want to slow it down and really create an opportunity here for this to land. I've been involved in the nonprofit world really for the first time in my life in a big way, just in the last 2 years. And I've just come to appreciate in countless ways around the world, people are doing little things and sometimes big things to make the world a little better. They're improving medical care. They are paving potholes. They are teaching children in school. They are teaching mindfulness. They are putting a stop sign outside that school. They are improving procedures in an airport. They are forming groups of various kinds to promote, to bridge differences in society. Bit by bit, they are weaving and mending the fabric of a healthy society, even in countries that are quite totalitarian and, oppressive in their government, but still people are doing real good things. You, I bet you, are often involved in helping things be better, signing petitions, sending a little money, standing in solidarity with other people, speaking up for those who are being, pushed around. Millions and millions of efforts to make a better world. That's true. That's real. We can really appreciate that, right? And I want to drop a couple quotations in that I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. By the way, we're going to send this graphic out in the follow-up to this Wednesday meeting. We're going to send that out on Saturday. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to share instead a quotation from Gary Snyder, Zen practitioner, poet, activist. Gives us a sense of the things that are happening. This lovely quotation from Gary Snyder. He says, for the children, the rising hills, the slopes of statistics lie before us, the steep climb of everything, going up as we all go down. In the next century or the one beyond that, they say, our valleys, pastures, we can meet there in peace if we make it. To climb these coming crests, one word to you and your children, stay together, learn the flowers, go light. That's in the spirit of that third layer in the triangle, in the pyramid, of all kinds of efforts being made to make a better world. You know, the world is in trouble. On the other hand, we've made a lot of progress in the last 10, 100,000 years. And think about what a pickle we'd be in without that third level in the triangle of the many, 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 many good things that, you know, are really happening here. So I want to go back then, as we continue, to my triangle and share it here with you and talk about the fourth level, which is the goodness in ordinary life. And I want to speak here to the goodness in you. We can get very preoccupied with the top of the triangle. Actual harms that make us angry and fill us with dread, make our heart heavy. It's real. It's so important also to recognize the goodness in ordinary life. Just being here together with each other has a goodness in it. Your own good intentions, ketchup on French fries, you know, music, loving your children, loving each other, walking your dog, you know, just everyday life, looking out, seeing the trees, seeing the birds, enjoying a little music, enjoying a movie, not at all denying or bypassing what's bad, but just the goodness in ordinary life. There's so much that's good, even as some things are bad, right? People throughout history have dealt with really crummy things. And here too, I want to drop another quotation in, and then I'll come back to the triangle. So I'm going to quote this incredibly, for me, touching short poem from Wendell Berry. I'm going to stop sharing so I can use the chat. Here we go. Great. So Wendell Berry wrote this in 1968, and I was around then. And height of turmoil in the U.S., around much of the world, Vietnam War, tons and tons of terrible atrocities, deaths. What a mess. And here we have Wendell Berry, beautiful being, writing, "In the dark of the moon, in flying snow, in the dead of winter, war spreading, families dying, the world in danger. I walk the rocky hillside, sowing clover." Still doing what he could in his ordinary life as an expression of his life, of what he cared. He couldn't stop the Vietnam War. He couldn't stop himself, global warming, as an environmentalist. But the act itself was worth doing. Your petition, your money, your vote, your witnessing may not itself change things outside, but it changes things inside. Those activities are worth doing in their own right. And we can take refuge in the knowing of that as part of this fourth level in the triangle here, the goodness in everyday life. It's important to recognize these things and to feel them, right? Yeah. And then there's the fifth level. And for me, each of these levels are at least 10 times bigger than the level above. It's a lot of time. It's a big planet. A lot of history. A lot of empires rising and falling. Things changing. A lot of life. A lot of evolution. Our species has been here for 300,000 years already. Anatomically modern humans. Grounded in ancestors who could make stone tools for another 2 million years before that. Personally, I think that we're most likely, probabilistically, in roughly the midpoint, at least, of the typical lifespan of a mammalian species, which seems to be around 1 million or more years. Yes, I recognize some unprecedented threats of various kinds, but whatever the future may be, it's been a long, long ride. I live on the edge of open space in north of San Francisco. Native people were walking through my backyard 10,000 years ago because I live in a watershed. I'm sure of it. And personally, I think people will be walking, in my backyard 10,000 years from now, if not 100,000 or more. And beyond the planet, it's a big solar system. It's a big galaxy. It's a really big universe. It's a really big picture. And I find it so helpful to kind of put the daily headline or the head spinner of the news in that context. And then finishing. The Buddha talked about that which is not conditioned. Everything before this last, I think, sixth layer of the triangle is conditioned. It occurs based on causes, and it arises and changes as those causes change. The Buddha said there's also, mysteriously, beyond language, certainly beyond science, an unconditioned realm that's distinct from conditioned Big Bang reality. Now, some argue about that. Some think he was wrong, or some think that he might have been right, but it's just not relevant. I think he was right, and it is relevant. I take my stand with those who see it that way. You don't have to see it that way here. In part for the sake of inclusiveness, I'm naming that sixth level here. And also because I think it's the ultimate refuge of all, as the Buddha pointed to in his teachings about the third noble truth, which is cessation, the cessation or the, I would say, disengagement, better word than cessation, from conditioned phenomena. So whatever this is for you, the mysterious, unborn, undying, eternal, timeless, vastness, stillness, ground of all, with qualities that great teachers and saints and sages, including teachers of my own, with qualities of somehow awareness and even lovingness in the ultimate ground of all. If that is true, if this is true, and if your sense of it is true, that's the ultimate context for the daily news or the daily ups and downs with the people in your life. Finishing here, and then I'll come back to the group as a whole. We can relate to this stuff merely intellectually, yeah, whatever. Or we can relate to it with our eyes open and realize, wow, this is actually what's really true. We can get really caught up at the local level and at the national level and at the global level. We can get really caught up in those first two layers. And I personally have expended the last 2 years of my life unpaid, most of it, all of it unpaid, and most of it related to this territory, to do what I can about those first two layers. So we do what we can, locally and globally. We do what we can. And it's so important to not let our preoccupations with those first two layers crowd out what is also true, the good that is also true. Including in the fourth layer and third layer, the third and the fourth layer of our individual efforts to make a better world, and meanwhile, having as good an ordinary life as we possibly can, including for those around us. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen. So, thank you for hanging in here. Got a few more minutes. I really appreciate the comments that are being made. Marie Natalie, 29 minutes past. Yes, you nailed equanimity right on the head. Basically, the metaphor that's used, a lovely one, in Tibetan Buddhism is kind of or Buddhism as it's sort of spread out of northern India, is the jewel in the lotus. And what's interesting, wisdom and compassion, equanimity and love. Okay, and interestingly, sometimes the jewel is equanimity, wisdom, and sometimes it's love, and vice versa. And also, as people say, no mud, no lotus. So we have this combination that's central to practice of wisdom and a loving heart. You know, the wisdom that gives us balance and the heart that gives us juice and joy and connection. I'm thinking here of Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj line. He says, wisdom tells me I am nothing. Love tells me I am everything. And between these two banks, the river of my life flows. So you got it. Equanimity and compassion side by side. Okay. Equanimity also enables us to make the long flight, right? To fight rather, and to hang in there over time. Right? Without that equanimity, it's really hard to keep on going.